female victim, she's been shot in the abdomen as well as a through and through into the hand.
Police said the 6-year-old brought a handgun to a first-grade classroom and deliberately shot the teacher.
This was not an accidental shooting.
It's hard to imagine that someone so young could commit such an unthinkable act. Yet throughout history, children, some barely old enough to read, have turned their schools into scenes of violence. These are 10 of the youngest school shooters in history. It's over. Everything's over. It's done. Nothing matters now. These were the haunting words of Kip Kinkle, spoken after committing an unspeakable act that left a small Oregon town in shock. Now, before we dive into what he did, who was Kip Kinkle, and what could have driven him to such a dark place? August 30th, 1982. Kip was born in Springfield, Oregon, to William and Faith Kinkle, both high school Spanish teachers. Now, his childhood wasn't exactly smooth. In 1987, the Kinkle family spent a year in Spain, which kind of disrupted his early development, and adjusting back to life in the States was tough for him. School in particular was a challenge. Kip struggled with things like motor skills and spelling. Eventually, his parents had him tested, and he was diagnosed with dyslexia. And for Kip, this made school a place of frustration rather than growth. And as he moved into middle school, things wouldn't get better. Instead, Kip began spiraling out of control. In 7th grade, he and some friends bought bomb-making manuals, like the Anarchist Cookbook. And by 8th grade, he was shoplifting CDs from Target and secretly buying a sawed-off shotgun from a friend. And of course, this wasn't just him trying to be rebellious. There were signs of something deeper. January 4th, 1997, Kip's issues with authority kept growing, and it would come to a point when he and a friend were arrested for throwing rocks at a car. Now, although both were charged, they would avoid juvie detention. And following that, Kip would start seeing a psychologist who diagnosed him with major depressive disorder. But despite regular therapy, his behavior didn't improve much. April 23rd, Kip was suspended for attacking a fellow student, and just a week later, he was suspended again, this time for throwing a pencil at another student. In this attempt to help him, Kip's doctors prescribed Prozac. After that, it seemed like things were looking up, but not for long. June 27th, Kip's parents wanted to channel his energy in a more positive direction, so they let him buy a gun, hoping that lessons in gun safety would make a positive difference. But just a month later, Kip secretly bought a semi-automatic pistol and hid it from him. At the start of the school year, Kip enrolled at Thurston High. He started off pretty well, even joining the football team. And to encourage his progress, his father gave him a semi-automatic rifle and a hunting knife, believing that Kip was finally turning a corner. But in reality, Kip was fooling everyone, and his troubles were far from over. Around this time, a series of school shootings would take place across the U.S., and it seemed to ignite something dangerous within him. So he began planning his own attack. May 20th, 1998, Kip was caught with a stolen loaded handgun at school. A friend had stolen it from another friend's father and sold it to Kip the night before. He and his friend were arrested, but released later that day. Kip's father picked him up, and he was furious at him. He warned Kip that if this behavior didn't improve, military school was next. That conversation would be their last. Once they got home, Kip, all filled with rage, took a rifle from his room and shot his father in the back of the head. He dragged that body to the bathroom, and hours later, when his mom arrived home, Kip would say a chilling "I love you" before killing her as well. The next morning, Kip dressed in a trench coat, hiding multiple weapons. He then walked into Thurston High and opened fire in the cafeteria. 2 students died and 25 others were injured before Kip was subdued by fellow students and eventually arrested. But even in custody, the violence wouldn't stop. While being held at the station, Kip managed to pull a hidden knife and threaten the officers, even trying to cut his own wrists. But the officers disarmed him using pepper spray. By September 24th, 1999, Kip, just 15 years old at the time of the attack, was charged with 58 felony counts, including 4 for aggravated murder and 26 for attempted murder. Defense psychologists argued that Kip was suffering from serious mental health conditions, including undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia, and claimed that if these issues had been looked into, the tragedy could have been avoided. Regardless, Kip pled guilty to all charges. He was given 111 years in prison with no possibility of parole.
While this prosecution was successful in doing what needed to be done, namely forever protecting society from Mr. Kinkle, there are no winners in this incident.
October 24th, 2014, the halls of the Marysville-Pilchuck High School in Washington were forever changed. 15-year-old Jaylen Fryberg, once the life of the party, committed a horrific act that left 4 of his peers dead before he turned the gun on himself. Just a week earlier, Jaylen was a homecoming prince, standing tall, flashing a smile as his classmates cheered him on. He was popular, well-liked, and even the star of the football team. Everyone thought he had it all. In the eyes of his friends and teachers, Jaylen was the kindest of people you could root for. He was ambitious, caring, and driven. And he wasn't just a star athlete either. Jaylen was a proud Native American and a member of the Tulalip tribe. And those close to him believed that he had a bright future as a tribal leader. So frankly, no one could have guessed what was coming. Following the tragedy, one of his classmates summed up the disbelief felt by so many.
Not the kind of guy that would do this. He's nothing that would even give you the slightest idea of something was wrong with him.
But apparently there was more to Jaylen than most people saw. On the surface, everything looked fine, but social media would show stories from friends hinting at something that might have been brewing beneath his confident exterior before he finally exploded. You see, a few weeks before the shooting, Jaylen had gotten into a fight after someone made a racist comment towards him. He was suspended from school, adding tension to what seemed like an already fragile emotional state. And then there was the breakup. Jaylen's Twitter feed in the weeks before the tragedy was filled with heartbreak. In one of his last tweets, he wrote, "It breaks me. It actually does. I know it seems like I'm sweating it off, but I'm not. And I never will be able to." And his final tweet, posted just the day before the shooting, was chillingly simple. It won't last. It'll never last. Still, no one saw it coming. On the day of the shooting, Jaylen seemed fine. He even chatted with friends at a football practice and exchanged handshakes, showing no signs of the darkness building inside. But then, everything changed in the cafeteria just hours later. At the time of the shooting, there were around 150 students in the cafeteria. When the first shot was heard, nobody could believe their eyes. There stood Jaylen, gun in hand, firing into a group of his friends. In total, 4 of Jaylen's closest friends were killed, and several others wounded. The vice principal immediately put the school on lockdown. But by then, the damage was done. Jaylen would finish this off by turning the gun on himself and end his own life. In the aftermath, the focus shifted to his father, Raymond Fryberg Jr., who had illegally purchased the gun used in the shooting. Raymond had lied on the background check, concealing a history of domestic violence, which legally bars him from owning firearms. March 2015, he pled not guilty but was eventually convicted of illegal possession of firearms and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But doesn't matter, the shooting shook the community to its core. Students, teachers, family members all were left grappling with the question, how could someone so beloved, someone with so much potential, commit such an unthinkable act? November 30th, 2021 started like any other day at Oxford High School in Michigan. But by the time the clock hit 12:50 p.m., everything changed. 15-year-old sophomore Ethan Crumbley walked out of the bathroom with a 9mm Sig Sauer handgun hidden in his backpack. Without warning, he opened fire in the hallway as students rushed between classes. By the time the shooting stopped, 4 students were dead and 8 others, including a teacher, were injured. Another tragedy that shakes the nation. And what made it all more heartbreaking was that there had been warning signs. Clear ones. Earlier that very day, a teacher had found a disturbing drawing on Ethan's desk. It showed a gun, blood, and the words, "Help me, the thoughts won't stop." His parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, were called to the school for an emergency meeting. But instead of taking their son home, they left him there, even though they knew about the gun they had just bought for him. And just a few days before the shooting, the school had reached out to Ethan's mom. After he was caught looking up ammunition on his phone, she brushed it off, even texting him, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught." No one took the steps needed to stop what was coming. That November day, when Ethan's parents left school, they had no idea that their son had already hidden a gun somewhere on the premises, ready to carry out the deadly plan he'd been working on for months. Now later, during Ethan's trial, the court heard how he had meticulously planned this attack. In a chilling manifesto recorded the night before the massacre, he declared, "There's no God. I'm the demon. I'm gonna open fire on everyone in the hallway." Jesus. He'd even recorded a video stating, "My name is Ethan Crumbley, age 15, and I'm gonna be the next school shooter." Now the courtroom also found out that Ethan's troubled home life was pretty bad. His parents had a history of run-ins with the law, including DUIs and fraud, and they were known for neglecting him. When Ethan was young, many neighbors reported that he was often left alone while his parents went out drinking. By 2021, things took a darker turn, when Ethan's only friend moved away and the family dog died. Texts to his mother became more disturbing, filled with talk of demons and ghosts. He started torturing animals and sketching out his plans for a school shooting. Yet, despite all these red flags, his parents never sought help for him. So now, following that shooting, Jennifer and James Crumbley were both charged with involuntary manslaughter, becoming the first parents in the U.S. to face criminal charges for their role in a school shooting. They were given 15 years in prison, eligible for parole after 10. December 2023, Ethan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before the court, he apologized to the victims' families, saying,
"Any sentence that they ask for, I ask that you do impose it on me, because I want them to be happy and I want them to feel secure and safe."
Yet, of course, his words did little to ease the pain of those who lost their loved ones. At the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. September 28, 2016. In the early hours of the morning, 14-year-old Jesse Osborne stood in front of a mirror, combing his blonde hair, and recorded a video. He cracked a dark joke to the camera.
Your hair straight whenever you go shoot someplace up, you know? Gotta look fabulous, you know? Just gotta look fabulous.
Just hours later, Townville, South Carolina would be forever changed. In their home that morning, Jesse Osborne shot and killed his father, 47-year-old Jeffrey Osborne, who had allegedly been abusing Jesse for years. Jesse then drove his black pickup truck 3 miles to Townville Elementary School, where he had once been a student. By 1:45 p.m., he crashed into the school's fence, got out, and fired a .40 caliber pistol into the air, shouting, "I hate my life." Moments later, Jesse scaled the fence and opened fire on the school's playground. Students and teachers were scrambling for safety, but one student wasn't able to escape, Jacob Hall. He was shot in the leg, and the bullet caused massive blood loss, leading to cardiac arrest. Despite being rushed to the hospital and undergoing surgery, Jacob died 3 days later. Jesse's attack only ended when his gun jammed just 12 seconds after he pulled the trigger. A volunteer firefighter at the scene tackled and restrained him until police arrived. During interrogation, Jesse broke down, calling his grandparents to tearfully confess to what he had done. Now, what led to this tragedy? Well, you see, in the months leading up to the school shooting, Jesse had been going downhill. He'd previously been expelled from middle school after bringing a hatchet and a machete onto school grounds. At the time of the shooting, he was being homeschooled, but that would do little to tame his violent tendencies. The internet searches would show a disturbing obsession with mass shootings, more specifically that 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary shooting. And he would even discuss his plans online in a chat group filled with people interested in mass killings. Jesse talked about how Townville Elementary didn't have cops, and that he could get there within 4 minutes, and he initially planned on killing 50 or 60 people. In the end, Jesse Osborne pled guilty to 2 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. November 2019, he was given life in prison without parole for his father's and Jacob Hall's death, and 30 years for the attempted murder charges. Jesse has appealed multiple times, and finally in September 2023, Jesse's 2 life sentences were modified to 75 years each. Now, this adjustment allowed him to participate in prison programs that were previously unavailable to inmates serving life without parole. February 2, 1996. 14-year-old Barry Loukaitis walks into his middle school in Moses Lake, Washington, dressed like a gunslinger. Hidden under his coat were 2 pistols and a high-powered rifle. This day would end in tragedy, with 3 people dead and several others traumatized by the violence they witnessed. Born February 26, 1981, Barry had a really turbulent childhood. He spent his early years in Iowa and Minnesota before moving to Washington with his family when he was in 5th grade. But his home life began to unravel with his father's affair on one side and his mom's mental health problem on the other. His mother would often speak about killing herself and even suggested that they both end their lives together on Valentine's Day in 1996. Now, many wondered if this home environment pushed Barry over the edge. Barry himself would later say that the relentless bullying at school and his problems with clinical depression were what truly led to his violent outburst. Now, that fateful morning, rather than taking the bus to school, Barry chose to walk. With every step, he moved closer to the horrifying act he was about to commit. He walked inside his algebra's classroom and drew his weapon, shooting and killing his teacher as she stood there in front of the chalkboard, still holding onto the eraser. He then turned the gun on his classmates, killing 2 students, one of whom had bullied him, and injuring another girl by shooting her in the arm. For a brief time, Loukaitis took hostages in the classroom, but this would all end with one brave teacher, John Lane, who entered the room, helped evacuate the wounded, and tackled Barry to the ground, holding him there until police arrived. By September 1997, Loukaitis was convicted of 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. He was given 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. But his story didn't end there. In the years following his sentencing, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that juveniles, those under 18 at the time of their crime, couldn't be given automatic life sentences without the chance of parole. So in 2017, Barry returned to court for resentencing. For the first time, he publicly apologized for his horrific acts.
None of you should have to go through that. And it was because I was stupid, and because I was pathetic, and because I was weak.
Despite this, the court upheld his punishment, sentencing him to 189 years in prison. December 1st, 1997, the calm of a typical school day at Heath High School in West Paducah, Kentucky, was shattered when 14-year-old Michael Carneal launched a tragic attack, killing 3 girls and injuring 5 others. Now, Michael was a B- student with no major disciplinary issues, but beneath the surface, he was struggling and didn't have many friends. He often tried fitting in by bringing items to school to sell, even resorting to stealing to gain friendship. Yet, unfortunately, his small stature and physical weakness made him a target for bullying. And to make matters worse, a gossip column in the middle school's newspaper claimed that he had feelings for another male student, leading to a barrage of name-calling that only intensified his isolation and hatred. So in the weeks leading up to the shooting, Michael stole a .38 handgun from his parents' room, hoping to sell it. But a fellow student would take this gun from him, threatening to inform the authorities unless Michael handed it over. That experience, combined with his earlier attempts to connect with peers, deepened his sense of helplessness and frustration. And around that time, Michael had also started telling students that something big is going to happen, but no one would take him seriously. And as November rolled around, Michael stole 2 shotguns from his father's closet and hid them under his bed. And with a chilling determination, he prepared to carry out his plan. On that fateful December morning, he wrapped the shotguns and 2 pistols in a blanket, claiming that they were part of an art project he was working on. Once at school, he put in his earplugs and pulled a pistol from his bag, Without hesitation, he fires 8 rounds into a youth prayer group, a moment of chaos that left a lasting impact on everyone present. But when Michael saw his friend, Nicole Hadley, fatally injured, he placed his pistol on the ground and surrendered to the school's principal, Bill Bond. In the aftermath, Michael Carneal was charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. December 16, 1998, he was given 3 concurrent life sentences for the murders, along with an additional 120 years for the attempted murders and burglary. So after spending 25 years in prison, Michael had applied for parole. He claimed that at the time of the shooting, he felt like he was in a dream and that voices in his head urged him to commit the violent act.
I don't remember firing the gun or how many times I fired it, but the next thing I remember is people laying on the ground.
September 26, 2022. The parole board unanimously denied Michael's request for release, ordering him to serve the remainder of his life sentence. Under Kentucky law, this ruling means he'll no longer be eligible for future parole hearings, effectively turning his life with parole sentence into life without it. September 4th, 2024. Everything changed at Appalachia High School in Georgia to the point of no return. A 14-year-old boy named Colt Gray walked into the school and opened fire, killing 2 students and 2 teachers. Chaos erupts as students and staff rush for safety in the football field, while police swarm the campus. Once Colt realized he was surrounded, he didn't put up a fight and surrendered to the school's officers as they approached him. During that deadly attack, he used an AR-style rifle, the kind we often see in school shootings. But why would a 14-year-old have access to such a weapon, you ask? Well, that gun was a Christmas gift from none other than his father, Colin Gray. And now Colt faced 4 counts of felony murder, and his father was arrested too, charged with second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and cruelty to children for allowing his son to have a gun. But this incident left everyone asking one heartbreaking question: why? Even though Colt gave himself up quickly, the reason behind the shooting still remains unclear. No one knows if he was targeting specific people or if it was all random. Now, what we do know is that Colt's life at home wasn't too easy, and this wasn't his first encounter with trouble. A year before the shooting, when Colt was only 13, the FBI received tips that he'd been making threats on Discord, hinting at a school shooting. When they questioned him, Colt denied it.
Did you say something about school shooting? Never, I just told him, I don't know what. Maybe they misheard somebody else. I would never say I was threatening. You never ever said. No, I swear.
His father also assured authorities that their guns were locked up, and Colt didn't have access to any of them. And so the investigation wouldn't go any further because they couldn't link Colt directly to the threats. And Colt was really struggling at home. His parents had separated, and his father admitted Colt was often picked on at school. Now his mom, Marcy Gray, had noticed her son wasn't himself in the months leading up to the shooting. And just 6 days before, she called the school, hoping to get Colt admitted to a treatment facility. Colt agreed, but sadly, it wasn't fast enough. On the morning of the shooting, Colt sent 2 chilling texts, one to his mom saying, "I'm sorry, Mom," and another to his dad telling him, "You're not to blame for this." His mother was terrified when she saw the message and immediately called the school, but by then it was too late. In the days after, she described her disbelief and heartbreak, going on to say that when she first heard about the shooting, she fell to the ground and just screamed, knowing deep down it was her son. The grief, guilt, and shock hasn't left her since. And now Colt faces life in prison, and because he's a juvenile, he's not going to get the death penalty. His father's also awaiting trial, and investigators are re-examining their previous encounters with the family, including the FBI case from a year earlier. But at the end of the day, the community was broken. People are asking if this could have been prevented, and most importantly, how could a parent let their kid have access to such dangerous weapons?
A school shooting in Serbia has left 8 students and a security guard dead. The suspect, a 13-year-old male student.
May 3rd, 2023. Belgrade, Serbia woke up to devastating news. A chilling call came into the police with the caller, a boy with a young voice, saying, "I'm Kosta Kecmanovic, and I've just shot several people." Just an hour earlier, 13-year-old Kosta Kecmanovic walked into his school as if it were any other day, but this time he had a malicious plan in mind. Armed with a gun, he shot the school security guard and 2 female students in the hallway before entering a classroom and opening fire, killing 7 more students and wounding 5 others. Afterward, he calmly walked to the schoolyard and called the police to confess. Now, due to his young age, Kosta was never charged with a crime and was instead placed in a psychiatric hospital. Investigations showed that he had planned the attack for a month, selecting his targets and mapping out the classrooms he'd enter first. His father, a respected radiologist, had taken him to shooting ranges, and the weapons used in the massacre were legally owned by the family. Now, Kosta had a privileged background, and he was never really bullied, but still the tragedy unfolded. His parents were arrested shortly after, and his father faced charges for allowing Kosta to access firearms and take him to a shooting range, while his mother was charged with criminal neglect. She said that she saw nothing unusual in Kosta's behavior that morning, aside from him being slightly lethargic at breakfast. And when she first heard about the shooting, she believed that her son was a victim, only to be faced with the terrible truth upon arriving at the scene. Her son had killed 10 people. July 2023, Kosta testified against his father, admitting he'd been taught to shoot and that his father admired his accuracy. He also shared that his fascination with video games and this mass murder documentary contributed to his dark thoughts. Kosta did express regret for his actions, claiming that he had changed his mind and felt remorse for the shooting, and if he could turn back time, he wouldn't do it again. But for the families of the victims, that was a little too late. And well, in the eyes of many, Kosta Kecmanovic hasn't faced real punishment for the lives he took. And despite the tragedy, he'll even get to continue his education and maybe even have his whole life ahead of him, something his victims don't get to do. August 2023, Kosta's mom reached out to institutions, requesting arrangements for both him and his younger sister to continue their schooling through online education because he's in a psychiatric facility. On the Teachers' Council at Kosta's former school, Vladislav Rybnikar voted to expel him, but Education Minister Slavica Dejanovic explained that expulsion wasn't within the council's power. Instead, Kosta can continue his studies at Dragan Herzog Elementary School in Belgrade, a special school for students with health-related issues. The school's director confirmed that Kosta would resume his education there, though the exact format is yet to be determined. March 24th, 1998. An unimaginable tragedy unfolds at Westside Middle School in Jonesboro, Arkansas. 2 boys, Andrew Golden, 11, and Mitchell Johnson, 13, planned and executed a deadly shooting spree, leaving 5 people dead and 10 more injured. Now, these 2 weren't particularly close, but their bus rides back and forth were enough time for them to develop a bond over some sinister intentions. Andrew, the quieter of the 2, appeared to be a model student. He was well liked by teachers and peers, and he had a passion for shooting, often going to the range with his family. However, beneath that polite surface lurked a sadistic side. He loved shooting animals with his BB gun, and he would find his match in Mitchell, who was known to be a bully at school, and often talked about wanting to join the Bloods. Throughout this meticulous planning, the boys managed to steal 9 firearms and approximately 2,000 rounds of ammo from Andrew's grandfather, and then proceeded to execute the next phase of their evil scheme. After parking a van full of supplies for their escape in the woods behind the school, Andrew pulled the fire alarm, sending students and teachers rushing outside, and as they did, the 2 would open fire from the tree line, aiming at their unsuspecting classmates and teachers. In just 10 minutes, they had killed 4 students and 1 brave teacher, Shannon Wright, who had died while shielding a student from the bullets. They would injure 10 more before police arrived and arrested them. Despite the horrific actions, neither Andrew nor Mitchell could be tried as adults due to their ages. They were sent to juvie detention until they were 21. Both were released in their early 20s, Mitchell in 2005 and Andrew in 2007. Now, Mitchell continued to be a criminal. He was arrested multiple times for drugs, theft, and fraud, and ultimately served more time in prison as an adult now. Andrew, on the other hand, attempted to live under the radar, even changing his name to Drew Douglas Grant, as he would try to obtain a concealed weapon permit. His past, however, caught up with him, and his application was denied. Following that, Andrew mostly avoided public attention, until karma finally caught up with him. July 27, 2019. He was driving on a highway in Arkansas when he crossed the center and fatally crashed into another car. The two drivers would tragically lose their lives, bringing a sudden end to a life defined by violence and destruction.
Police say a 6-year-old boy, a first grader, somehow got a hold of a gun and opened fire at his teacher, critically wounding her.
January 6, 2023. The unbelievable occurs at Rich Neck Elementary School in Newport News, Virginia. A 6-year-old boy brings a gun to school and shoots his teacher, Abby Zwerner. When this tragedy happened, it was a typical afternoon, and Abby was teaching her little first graders. The 6-year-old, who had been displaying concerning behavior for some time, pulled out a 9mm handgun, pointed it at his teacher, and fired. The bullet pierced Abby's hand and lodged into her chest, yet somehow, despite the pain, she managed to get her students to safety before collapsing. The boy got that gun from home, where it was allegedly kept locked away by his mom, Deja Taylor, who would later face charges for child neglect and gun-related offenses. The story raised a lot of questions about how such a young child could carry out such a violent act, and it reignited debates over gun safety, parental responsibility, and sadly, school security. Also, before this fateful day, there had been warning signs. The boy had a history of behavioral problems. He would act out, curse at staff, and even physically harm his teachers. Abby, along with the other staff, was concerned after he threatened to beat up a fellow student and even show another student the gun. Yet, despite these red flags, the administrators told the staff to wait out the situation. And as the investigation into the shooting unfolded, the attention shifted not just to the boy, but the failure within the system to allow such a tragedy to happen. Abby ended up suing Newport News School Board for $40 million, citing the administration's negligence. The school's assistant principal, Ebony Parker, who had been informed of the potential threat, was later indicted on charges of felony child neglect. Deja Taylor, the boy's mother, also took responsibility for the incident, acknowledging that her son had taken her gun, which she thought was securely stored. She faced both state and federal charges, including making false statements about the weapon and unlawfully possessing a firearm while using marijuana. November 2023, Taylor was given 21 months in prison for her federal offenses and an additional 2 years for child neglect.